She whispered one word, not to him, not to the leader, but to the ceiling fan. A word that sounded like normal conversation. A word that, if heard by the wrong ear, would mean silence, punishment, exile. For years she had been taught to measure everything in euphemisms and platitudes. In the space between those words and the things they hid, she learned to survive. What does it take to build a language that keeps you safe, and what does it take to unlearn it when the danger is over? This is a story about the words that bind us, the words that free us, and the secret language of those who escape. There is a paradox at the heart of every cult story. What looks like community can be built to control, what sounds like love can be built to demand obedience. Across decades of research, psychologists and survivors describe a consistent tool in that architecture of power: language. Please help this channel grow. Like the video, try the new hype feature, leave a comment and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Robert J. Lifton, a psychiatrist who studied thought reform, named one of the most insidious tools thought-terminating clichés, simple, polished phrases that stop thinking and quiet doubt. These aren't just slogans. They're a new way to think, packaged as an answer so neat it closes the conversation. Later work refined this. Therapist Stephen Hassan developed the BITE model: behavior, information, thought, emotion, and placed language at the heart of how undue influence operates. Loaded language, he wrote, constricts knowledge, stops critical thought, and reduces complexities into platitudes. In short, the right words can change how you think about yourself and whether you see an exit. This documentary does not tell one survivor's life, it follows a pattern, one that appears again and again, from isolated communes to glossy self-help networks. We'll look at how language is weaponized, how victims learn a codebook that blurs reality, and how, in the quiet after escape, survivors invent another language, sometimes a secret code, to reconnect with themselves and warn others. To anchor our investigation, we will examine a high-profile documented case where language, secrecy, ritual, and abuse combined. The NXIVM organization, a purported self-help company that, investigators later found, housed a secret inner society with coded terms, rituals, and practices that enabled exploitation. The federal case and witness testimony revealed the way language was used to normalize violence and to hide it. The full criminal convictions and sentencing are on record. To understand the crime, you must first understand the vocabulary. Within NXIVM, as with many high-control groups, leaders and inner lieutenants folded ordinary words into a separate grammar. Workshop meant initiation, ethics meant loyalty tests, the work meant obedience. Investigators later documented how a secret sisterhood within NXIVM, called DOS, a name presented as an acronym for a vague, empowering phrase, functioned as an underground hierarchy. Women were given new names, assigned masters and slaves, and asked to provide collateral, intimate, compromising material held as insurance. Rituals included branding and coercive readiness drills that enforced obedience under threat of exposure or social ruin. The crimes were not abstract. They were physical, sexual, bureaucratic. Victims testified that what started as self-improvement and mentorship became a structure where refusal meant humiliation, where doubt was met with thought-stopping phrases, where collateral was a currency that bought silence. They taught me that shame was mine alone. They called every question resistance and every hesitation an opportunity. The legal record confirms this transformation from self-help into coercion. In 2019, a federal jury convicted NXIVM's founder of racketeering, sex trafficking, and related crimes, and the court later imposed a lengthy sentence and restitution to victims. The government's filings outline the network of coercion, including the practice of collecting collateral and the branding that marked victims physically and socially. How did language make that possible? Look at two things. First, redefinition, taking neutral words and packing them with new rules. Second, silence rewards, the social structure that punished questions. Together, they created the illusion of consent. This pattern is neither new nor unique. From Jonestown to smaller, religiously framed groups, researchers have documented the same move: leaders who name, label, and then isolate. Labels are powerful. When you rename someone, you restructure their sense of self. When you insist that only you, the leader, can interpret the labels, you become the gatekeeper to reality. Victims in these situations described the language as addictive. It offered tidy answers, eliminated ambiguity, and rewarded compliance. The leader's vocabulary recentered every complaint, every doubt, as a personal failing rather than an institutional one. Complex power systems rarely collapse from force. They crack from leaks, a confusion here, a brave voice there. Investigations into high control groups often begin with one thing: language that doesn't make sense. Journalism and tip-offs. For NXIVM, investigative reporting in a cluster of press pieces exposed oddities, former members sounding alarm bells about paid courses and secrecy. Those reports drew attention, attorneys and investigators noticed patterns. Those courses had their own dialects, their own lexicon, their own rituals. Victim testimony and the unwrapping of code. Prosecutors subpoenaed documents, emails, membership lists, and the infamous collateral, and they interviewed former insiders. Under oath, witnesses described how collateral functioned, how readiness drills were used to test obedience, how euphemisms like the work were wielded as commands. When the language was placed under the harsh light of a courtroom, it lost its veneer and revealed the coercion beneath. Connecting linguistic patterns to criminal acts. Prosecutors showed that the vocabulary wasn't just cosmetic, it coordinated behavior. Women followed orders framed in that language, they provided labor and sexual access, often under the threat of collateral. The words were not mere labels, they were mechanisms of enforcement. But investigators also found something else among those who left: a second language, created out of necessity. Survivors described adopting code words and safe phrases to communicate outside the group's oversight in text messages, in emails, in quick phone calls. Some used innocuous phrases or song titles as signals. Others retreated into private nicknames and aliases when recounting events online, afraid the reach of the organization might follow. These adaptations were both pragmatic and poetic, a way to speak truth when truth had become dangerous. Psychology and analysis of experts testified and wrote about the role of thought-stopping phrases and loaded language in creating an environment where consent could be manufactured. That testimony provided the legal scaffolding to tie linguistic control to criminal coercion. In court, language that once stopped thought became evidence of intent and design. The long unraveling convictions and penalties are the visible end, but for survivors, investigation is only the start. They face restitution hearings, attempts at reclamation, and the painstaking work of translating their experiences into normal vocabulary that a judge, a family member, and a therapist can understand. Saying I was branded to my mother felt like speaking in another language. She heard tattoo and didn't hear coercion. Ranieri's trial ended with a conviction. Courts found patterns of sex trafficking, racketeering, and forced labor. Sentences followed and restitution orders were issued, public accountability that, for many survivors, mattered deeply. But outside the courtroom, survivors faced new obstacles. Language that once concealed trauma now obscured recovery. Therapists and advocacy groups noted that cult survivors struggle with vocabulary, not only with remembering what happened, but with finding the words to tell it. Clinical studies and interviews show a common landscape: survivors report isolation, PTSD, difficulty trusting, and an urgent need to relearn how to name harm and reclaim identity. Another part of the aftermath is the internet. Online forums and survivor groups provide anonymity and a shared lexicon of recovery. Here, members develop a different secret language, not for silence, but for safety and solidarity. They invent shorthand for triggers, safe steps, and exit scripts, practical phrases to use in emergencies. For example, domestic violence advocates have long taught code words for victims to use discreetly. Similar strategies naturally arise in cult survivors' communities, adjusted for their specific needs. For many survivors, reclaiming language becomes a ritual of its own. Some choose to rename themselves. Some write journals and blogs with new vocabularies. Others teach their children different words, to sever inherited silence. The process is not purely semantic, it is moral and social. It reopens the possibility of a future not built on someone else's terms. Words can be prisons, and words can be keys. For victims inside high-control groups, language does more than name experience, it shapes it. To decode that language is not an exercise in semantics, it is a rescue mission. Our duty as journalists, as citizens, as neighbors is not only to uncover the crimes but to learn the words survivors need. The courtroom needs legal language. Families need simple, compassionate language. Survivors need spaces where they can tell their stories without translation or shame. When we teach one another the correct words, we restore power that was taken. So what does decoding the secret language of cult survivors really mean? It means listening patiently. It means refusing the platitudes that once silenced them. It means holding institutions and ourselves accountable for how we let language be used.